past president of the Columbus Historical Society and has written a history column for the website ColumbusUnderground.com since 2011. He's the co-author of Kahiki Supper Club, A Polynesian Paradise in Columbus, for the History Press. His partner in this book, Christine Hayes, spent her childhood in Columbus restaurants while her father gathered tidbits for his Columbus Citizen Journal columns. She published a book of these columns called the Ben Hayes Scrapbook, which is back on their table back there if you want to see it. Today, Christine assists in the Acorn Bookshop in Grandview, writes a column for the Short North Gazette, and as Ramona Moon makes art cars and collage assemblage. She graduated from UC Irvine in theater, taught Montessori school, and lived in San Francisco for 27 years before returning to Columbus. Help me welcome Doug and Christine to Columbus Rotary.
So we have the honor of trying to squeeze our 45-minute presentation into 25 minutes. So we might go a little quickly here. Doug and I met through the Columbus Historical Society. I wrote a little bit about the Kahiki, and then he published that part in the Kahiki book. This is our book, Lost Restaurants of Columbus. This came out a couple of years ago, and we are finished with the second book that's going to be coming out in November, which we're very excited about. So if you don't see your favorite restaurant stay tuned. It will be in volume 2, probably. We will have time for questions afterwards. Shall we go ahead? Let's see. There's a little button we advance here. There's the book. We just want to talk about the longevity of some of these. Forrester's Wins. Its sign is still down there just south of where Lazarus was. It was de novo recently. It was always a confectionery and also a restaurant, and went through the same family for many, many years. Then the employees tried to keep it open, but it didn't succeed, but it was there the longest of any Columbus restaurant. By the way, we're not doing hotels and hotel restaurants because those are handled by another team. Yeah. Yes.
So we kind of jumped ahead with this. So that's the oldest restaurant in Columbus. What do you think is the second oldest restaurant? I see some folks here who might have a guess. Who has a guess for the second oldest restaurant? That table over there. What do we think the oldest Columbus restaurant is? Okay. Well, we were talking with Teddy earlier. He was asking us about the Columbus Steakhouse, which became a go-go dance club, and he was telling us about some mob connection with a gentleman that we're not writing about that, but he was telling us about that. So, any idea what's the second longest Columbus restaurant? Reeb's. Really close. Really. I mean, we both of those are in here, and Teresa Marzetti and of course Ed Ballinger and the Reeb family. Local politicos would go there. It was kind of the Claremont of its day on the east side. What I didn't know about Reeb's when we were interviewing that is they actually had a second kitchen where they made their own sauerbraten, and they would actually age that for about 6 days before they would do it. Reeb's got all of their baked goods from Resch's, and Resch's, fortunately for us, is still very much in business along Livingston Avenue. They're now, I love Resch's. I live in Berwick now, so I'm way too close to Resch's. They know me by first name, but they've been in business now for 107 years. So we love Resch's.
Why are those horses?
Oh yeah, so the horses it's actually the Budweiser Clydesdales. They won a competition right after World War II of selling some of the most Budweiser in the city. So that's actually the Budweiser Clydesdale along Livingston Avenue, Livingston and Champion, nearby my beloved Old Oaks Historic District. So that's Reeb's. Any guess for so we talked about the next one, I believe already. Catherine's already nailed it. Right. Yep. So Teresa Marzetti came actually, we're not going to spend a lot of time, we've got so many anecdotes, but she came over as a very little girl. She was the oldest in her family because her father was actually in Columbus. He was actually, when the streetcar lines become electrified, he was Columbus's first casualty of a streetcar. He actually tried to get off the streetcar. The conductor said, "Don't get off that, you're going to hurt yourself." He did. So the family sent Teresa over to, of all the kids, she married Mr. Marzetti, and from there an empire grew. They moved the restaurant 3 different times. Initially at the corner of 15th and High. Then they moved it to Gay Street, where James Thurber famously would draw his own cartoons on the tablecloths, and then to the corner of Broad and High, where they stayed opened just until her death in 1971.
And let's do a shout out to Catherine Hill, who invented the famous salad dressings, and she was a wonderful black woman. Unfortunately, she was not able to eat in their own restaurant, and many restaurants, of course. So we wanted to just say a shout out to all the people who worked in the back of all these restaurants.
In fact, that's who we dedicated the book to.
All the wonderful Greeks and Italians and black people, and of course now our wonderful immigrants who keep our restaurants going.
Okay, so since you mentioned Catherine Hill, I have to tell the story. Yeah. Because she'd come up from the South, she was praying at a church, and she didn't have a job, and they said, "We've got a job for you at Marzetti's," and she was originally just there part-time to clean up. And they said to her, the manager, the co-owner at the time said, "Hey, you've got to keep the job, but you have to learn how to bake a pie." And she goes, "I don't know how to bake a pie." So for 2 weeks, she kept trying and trying to bake a pie, couldn't bake a pie. Then finally, the end of the second week, she thought she was going to lose her job. She said she prayed on it, and the Lord told her how to bake a pie. And this is her story. We're not making any of this up. So, and she finally learned how to bake a pie, so she kept her on. And then about a little while later, they said, "So we need to start making salad dressings. Do you know how to make a salad dressing?" She goes, "I don't know how to make a salad dressing, but let me pray on it." So that's where your famous Marzetti's. We'll give a huge shout out to Catherine.
Catherine Hill.
Talk about diners.
And we are. Did anybody ever eat at the back table at the Queen Bee? Of course you did. That was the famous one, of course, on Rich Street. I got it right. And Third. Thank you. It's on Third. And it's now Fourth. It's on Fourth.
Across from the Hartman. It's where
Fourth and Rich.
Yeah, it's where Dirty Frank's is.
Dirty Frank's is now. And of course, Christina and John Pritzolis ran that for 50 years. And Central Market was across the street, and they used to run it from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. And those were the go-to years for that. Circus Chef used to be south of the city. It had the humongous sign that said "Eat," and it was a favorite of the Grumpy Gourmet, we're going to give him a shout out as one of our muses, and Tom Thompson, who published the Short North, Fabulous Short North, and all these little This Week in Columbus, and of course my dad. So those are the people we quote the most in our book. Who else do we have over there? Benny Klein. Anybody remember Benny Klein around Broad and High? And he was the famous pickle man. He came from Hungary. Then he went up to Cleveland. He sold cottage cheese, and then he got acres of cucumbers grown for him. He became Andy Klein's pickle man. Then he came down to Columbus, and he started Benny Klein's and Jack and Benny's right there at Broad and High. And he lived in the Neal House across the street, so he could keep an eye on everything that was going on. And that was the center of politics in those days. Some lawyers even took up residence right there at Benny Klein's. I was always out on the sidewalk looking at the Roy's Jeweler stuff coming down, and I was a little scared of Benny Klein myself. Okay, go.
Okay, so neighborhood haunts, we'll talk about this a little bit. Betty's, some of that might be the most current one that we at least in this book, it was the one that was most current. I think it closed in 2014. Liz Lessner opened it up. Sadly for Liz, the day that she opened it up, she had opened it up from, it was the Galaxy Cafe, which also gets covered in the next book, and before it was the Galaxy Cafe, it was the Matryoshka Russian Tea Room. She decided to open up Betty's on September 11th, 2001. So it was a little rough going for her for a short while, but it became a very safe place for all kinds of people to visit. And she started the Surly Girl salad there, and we talk about the Surly Girl in the next book too, our friend Carmen Owens. She said, "We're going to start this Surly Girl salad because you don't know it, but you're going to get your own restaurant called the Surly Girl." So that's a little bit about Betty's in the fabulous Short North. Dibbles was actually, any of you guys remember Dibbles? I heard people talking about Hawaiian shirts and leis. Who was the most famous accordion player at Diebels? Esther Croft. You didn't pay past the lay. I mean, they did lots and lots of live music. Arnett Howard was often there as well. But it started out as a Hosters for a time. It was a Piggly Wiggly. It's really interesting if you still go in there now. If you're remember, you go into German Village. There's actually a bowling lane down the middle of it because for a time it was actually a sporting goods store, and if you paid a nickel, you could actually bowl a frame. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word for it. We're really going through these fast, and now of course today Diebels is the amazing Barcelona, and we love the Heinrichs. And Scott Brown, who run that together. Up in the corner, anybody recognize what that might be, the black and white shot? Governor Rhodes had his own fraternity based out of there. Heinrichs at OSU. Yeah, very a terrific place up there in the campus area. The Dell restaurant.
The Dell started out in 1930 as a tea room, and then it was owned by several successive Capital University professors of music. So some of you may remember singing around the piano at the Dell. And then it went through various closings and openings, and then it was a tapas restaurant with Susan Singh as the chef. Then the neighborhood kind of went downhill, and then it finally closed. But you may remember it fondly.
See what we got here. All right. Downtown favorites. I'll talk. Anybody ever go to One Nation? You ride the glass elevator? My favorite story about One Nation, because I was probably maybe in high school. Like I said, I grew up here, graduated in 1984 from Reynoldsburg. We were going up the escalator, or the great glass elevator on the outside of it. And who did I get to ride in the elevator with but Chalmers P. Wiley. It was very exciting for me going up the way with Congressman Wiley. But when you got up there, they actually had different parts of the country were highlighted. It was, you go down south, you could go up country. We've got recipes from the book. And there was actually run by Stofers at the very top of Nationwide. That's one of the things that I personally miss. I'm really excited for what's happening over at the hardware place where they're building, the Smith Brothers, where they're building that kind of rooftop area, because we don't have that space now in downtown to actually look over the restaurant. The Clock Restaurant began as Bott Brothers. I've got a great quote in here. I'm going to read this. This is in the book. I didn't realize this. It was actually Al Haft had his office upstairs. Al Haft, the wrestling king, and so it was not unusual to have lots and lots of the WWE style players coming through at the time. And in fact, one of them, who is it? Ted. Gorgeous George was there, but I'm thinking of Babe Zaharias, who was married, would be in there. But before it was that, it was this billiard parlor, which is so great. Carrie Nation visited it in 1908, and when she went in there, she says, "Come out of this gilded palace of sin, this hellhole." So if you think about Columbus as a palace of gilded sin and a hellhole, I don't agree with that. Babe Zaharias is who I was thinking about, and the wrestler Ted Victor. So, and today, of course, it's Columbus Brewing Company. So, you want to talk about Mills and Dorsam's?
Mills. Do you remember the cafeteria of Mills? Of course, they had restaurants in Cincinnati and Cleveland also. The wonderful mural that was on the second floor, that was the history of Ohio. As a child, I used to imagine that was my great-aunt's house in Marietta, but we are sadly missing Mills since it left. And Seafood Bay, is that what we have in the corner there? If you remember Seafood Bay there at, that was Gay and High.
I think it's Kennings.
Kennings was down there, Kennings. They started out, that was Mills. It was not a cafeteria. That was the early Mills down there. And then Leon and Ralph Kenning had worked at Mills, and then they started their own restaurant there. Had the beautiful kind of Bavarian murals there, and still kept the Dutch decor.
All right. So, do you want to talk about Dorsam's at all?
Dorsam's was there across from the RKO Palace. It was kind of had 6 different locations in downtown Columbus, but that was the most popular. People grabbed their little hamburgers with onions and went across the street to the movie. So it was a quick place. It's now, I believe, Chico's is in that very spot.
All right, so the lavish places. Any of you guys ever go to the Marimore? I happen to work in the building that took over the Miramore now, the PNC. The Miramore is one of my favorites that we talk about. And in fact, Christine and I tried to bring a little bit of artifacts. So after your luncheon, if you have an opportunity to kind of go in the back, we've got some candy boxes from the Miramore and menus. And I've got a great beer stein from Reeves back there too, which is kind of cool. But it was started by Mary Love. It's a conjugate, Mary and the French word amour for love. And Mary Love was actually brought to Columbus from St. Louis and the West at the time in about 1906 by the Lazarus family to run what becomes the Chintz Room. And she starts out on her own across the street from where the PNC is now and starts this amazing place called the Miramore. You were talking about doing the genealogy of the Jeffrey family. We were lucky enough to actually speak to Tad and Nancy, Tad before he passed, and Nancy's just so lovely. And they were talking about when they were engaged, that's where they had all their engagement gifts, and they had a card on the table of all the different things they wanted, because Brownie Pavey had a wonderful store in there, the library store, and of course they had the wonderful chocolates that are now by the Scher family. Alice B. Toklas and Gertrude Stein famously ate there and wrote that it would have been the envy of any of their friends in Paris. Duncan Hines always called it one of his favorites. When the Love family sold to the Schers and all the restaurants were moving from downtown, Danny Deeds kind of turned it into a terrific nightclub. If any of you guys, Mel Torme would be there, Phyllis Diller, the Smothers Brothers. Mel Torme famously said that Danny Deeds paid him off in Miramore chocolates. So, and of course, the Miramore Candy Company still exists. The Claremont, we were bemoaning the Claremont. It's really interesting in doing the research for this. A lot of people think the Claremont dates to 48, but we actually found out that the Claremont started where the Tremont Bar is now in 1938. And of course, Frank Condos, I think somebody was asking me about that in the famous Rolls Royce that Frank Condos had in the back of the Claremont, and talk about a place to go for political meetings. It was really funny when we were talking with the owners of that. They said at one point Dorothy Teeter was on the outs with another one of the commissioners, and so the owner purposely sat Dorothy and the one that she was opposed to facing each other. And we told this with Dorothy. She said she remembered the story, and he would always sit the ones that he liked in chairs. He would bump them up a little bit higher so that they would be higher than the other. It was really interesting. He said, this, where Judge Duncan would be, and this, it was, well, you guys know. So the Miramore or the Claremont would have been City Hall for breakfast when you were there. We sadly missed the Claremont. Of course, now it's a Panera. I'll talk about the High Lie, which is really amazing. The High Lie didn't begin its life as the Spanish-style building that we knew on Olentangy, but it actually started where the Short North is. And it opened about 4 days after Prohibition because the man, Jap Watering, who opened it up, actually had kind of a tip-off that Prohibition was going to end. So it started as one, and then it kind of kept expanding into all of its neighbors in where the Cap is now at the Short North. So it got its start there. But again, as everything was kind of moving out, the High Lie moved to Olentangy. One of my favorite stories, well, there's so many, I'm like rushing through to try and get this so we can get questions for you guys. But Jap had this idea at one point that there would actually be a flotilla of boats down the Olentangy to ferry people from the High Lie to OSU football games, right? But they said the current's going the other way, so that wasn't going to happen, right? So what they did do, though, in 1974, it was amazing when the Gervis family took it over. If you had ever gone to the High Lie when they moved it, it was the largest restaurant in the city. It could actually seat about 1,300 at any given sitting between the upstairs and the downstairs. And they had parking on the top, so they actually put in a helipad. And in 1974, you could have your luncheon at the High Lie and then be helicoptered to OSU to make certain you arrived to the game in style at the High Lie. So I love that. And of course, your Christine, Ben Hayes and Woody Hayes were cousins, and Ben Hayes and Woody Hayes both really loved the High Lie, but they were never there together. They each had their own day, they had their own booth, and so that was interesting to me. Let's talk about Heinrichs.
All right, Tommy Heinrichs. It was also on Broad Street, right near the Miramore. Tommy Heinrich was a Yankees player for 11 years, even though he did a short stint with the Cleveland Indians. His friend Alex Clausen, they had met in the minor leagues in Zanesville, and then Clausen went to OSU, and he asked Tommy to start this restaurant with him and lend his name. Tommy did start out telling anecdotes in the Diamond Room, and of course there were lots of wonderful bands. They had enough space. They had a band in the front and a band in the back. But Tommy pulled out, so this restaurant only lasted till the 60s. And then Tommy went on to other venues. But he, at 96 in Dayton, he died as the oldest living Yankee.
So I'll say this, we give a shout out to Catherine Hill, and before I pass this up, especially in thinking about the Miramore, and we'd already mentioned Betty's, and we were talking about Marzetti's, and I look around the room and I see a lot of men, but the restaurant business in Columbus was where a lot of women could excel within business. So all of these were very successful women-run businesses. I think of Betty's, I think of the Miramore, I think of Marzetti's. So when we think of that, that's a kind of a running string through the book as well when we were thinking about that. This was a place where women who in the early 1900s, 1950s, 1960s, we'll talk about chains and Betty Parker Brown, but restaurants somehow, maybe because of the association with food, maybe the association of food with home and nourishing and comforting, that was a place where many, many women could excel within the business world, and many, many women did take advantage of that. So. Themed restaurants. Well, there's Seafood Bay up at the top there. That's right. I'll let you talk about that.
Seafood Bay. We really loved Seafood Bay, and my dad used to write a column for Nick Pappas that was an advertisement for Seafood Bay. So we went every Tuesday night, and we wore our bibs and had lobster, if you even remember that. Although as a child I ate shad roe quite a bit. They did move to Grandview, 1250 West Fifth Avenue at the later years, but it was at Spring and High, and Nick expanded into 3 different storefronts. And there, if you may remember, there was an aquarium that was a window from the street, so you could see the aquarium. And I spent a lot of time in the bar watching the turtles and things swim around. We have a menu from the waterworks up there. It's a round manhole. You may remember what fun it was to eat lunch in a bathtub. And they had dishes that were all named, sewer scampi and pipeline pie and stuff like that. And so it was a great theme. It didn't last too long either, but it was great fun while it lasted. Young May, you remember, I used to work at Playhouse on the Green and get off work at 2 a.m. And Young May was still open. You could go down and have your mugu gai pan until 4 a.m. And they were quite known for having 300 different dishes. And you could take a 300-person carry-out from there also. So it was enjoyed late at night, which was unusual for Columbus at the time. Okay, tell us about Out on Main.
Well, Out on Main was this great restaurant. It was kind of like a gay-themed Hollywood cafe or Hard Rock cafe. But it was fantastic food as well. It was started in 1996 by Tom Grody and Michael Cavan, Grody of the Donatos family. Won numerous awards, not only for its architecture, but for its food. Chef Don Hauk was just, I really loved his turkey cakes, his spin on crab cakes. They sadly, because of 2000, the September 11th, they went out of business because of that. But they were also very philanthropic and began a foundation, the Flip Foundation, that gave money back to lesbian, gay, transgendered causes. But it was a terrific restaurant. So those are some of the themed restaurants. We don't have the Grapevine up here, but the Grapevine was actually featured, I remember, in Newsweek magazine as one of the country's first gay-themed restaurants, and that was on Gay Street. Today, it's better known as Tip Top. If you ever go into Tip Top Cafe, that's where the Grapevine was. So chains, gosh, there's a lot of chains. I mentioned Betty Parker Brown. You've got Burger Boy Foodorama at the sign of the whirling satellite. It was Betty Parker Brown who came up with that whole idea. There were 2 guys who had the Mainliner Diner on the east side, and oh God, I'm flipping out on the names. And the man who had Milton Lusnauer, yeah, Milton Roy, who had the Green Gables on the near kind of west side. They had their own drive-ins, which were amazing, but they had heard about this little chain called McDonald's that was coming along. So they wanted to start their own place to kind of, as a firewall against it, and it was extremely successful. It went from 1961 to 1969. 69, Borden Foods took it over. It became a Bordenburger. But yeah, I still remember, if any of you guys, this dates me, I was a really little kid when Lucy's Toy Shop was on the air, and they would go to the Ohio State Fair, and I had to tell Lucy a joke, and I won gift cards to Burger Boy Foodorama on the air with that, and it was really great.
This will date me because I danced on Jerry Razor's Dance-O-Rama, and which was sponsored by Burger Boy Foodorama.
Right. So then we've got Damon's. We're running low on time, so I want to get through some of these. But we had Damon's in there. I'm trying to think of Rax, which was Jack's and was like 1,000 of the names. I still remember the delicious, really thick milkshakes that they had at Rax. And Cantina del Rio's, that was actually a Bob Evans. They wanted to get into the Mexican food business, and that went just for a very short while. That went from 91 to 96. Philip Torbs, and they ended up with 15 restaurants, and the first one started over at Crossroads. So trying to be very mindful of time, and we've sped through this our restaurant journey. Are there any questions? Yes.
So all of these restaurants had signature dishes or things that they were known for. I personally remember going to the Highlight and getting those delicious salt rolls. Is there any, you've gathered the history, is there any place that has gathered the recipes, or I know, for instance, that they're in the book?
Yeah, there's recipes at the back of the book. And in fact, Dave Gervis, before he passed away, gave me the recipe for the salt sticks and the herb butter. But the smallest that we could break down the salt rolls was to make 800 of them. so we included the herb butter, but we didn't include the, if you're interested in it, I can tell you how to make it for probably one turn at the restaurant or something. But yeah, and in the next book we have even more. And the next book, you'll see that we kind of really focus strictly on Columbus. The next one, we went into the suburbs, so we've got the Bexley Monk, we've got a Peasant on the Lane, we've got the Bryn Mawr out in Granville.
And also 15 towns around Columbus, so it's going to be called Columbus and Central Ohio. So we've got a lot of those destination restaurants.
Yes, sir.
I was thinking about two restaurants, Gobley Food Bar and the Christopher Inn. Can you get any information on those?
Well, the Christopher Inn, as we said, we didn't talk about Maria's, what was Isabella's at the Christopher Inn, because our colleagues, Tom Betty and Doreen Hassauer, at the same time were doing a book on the hotels. So, and we were with the same press, and they asked us not to do the research, because I could have really talked about the Glass Gardens and the Peppercorn Duck Club, and we could have talked about the Purple Cow, and on and on and on, it goes with the hotels. What was the other one, though, that you...
Food Bar.
Looking for information on that.
Yeah, that's what Otto Bailey father owned that, and like they said, Martin Luther King and a bunch of folks used to come to there.
We did cover the Marble Gang in here, and we covered a couple of other places. So we tried. We just didn't talk about that. Okay, well, yes, sir.
I'm surprised that two you did mention Pursuities and Sensi's.
Yeah.
Pursuities is in here. We just, again, we were going through this. And what was the other one? Sensi's?
Sensi's, right there in Grandview, yeah. Yeah, we did Pursuities, which of course Pursuities started out as, he owned a saloon there where the Hylia, where the Greek Orthodox cathedral is right now.
All related.
Yeah, and the first and last chance saloon was Pursuities, of course, right there at Good Ale and High. And then there was Prohibition, so then the Pursuiti family went out of the saloon business, and actually, to set the record straight, that was called TAT restaurant there at Good Ale and High. Then they decided to start a restaurant in their home in Grandview, so that was the TAT Villa there, and then they sold that famously to the family who owns TAT now.
Got it.
Corollas, thank you. So, which is still open. We can't write about it, so it's the TAT is still in business. But Pursuities, of course, famously expanded their house into Pursuities Villa.
Actually, that's not Grandview, that's part of Columbus.
It is, but we call it Grandview, I know.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
I was going to add is there was one
one night when Jim Truman called me and said, we just bought Diaples. We're going to go to New York tomorrow, get in the car, and we're going to find out how to make the Eagles work for us. So that's what architects ended up doing. Somebody's got an idea of how to make it work.
You have to make it into a reality. I
That's
know.
fantastic.
There's the idea people, and then there's the reality people.
Yes,
sir.
Not all of us are from Columbus, so as a young child, I lived in Dayton, but my family always went to Ohio State. And I always remember as a young boy that anytime we came to college, it was my brother's place to pick the restaurant he wanted to go to. I don't know if this is in Columbus, but looking back, my fond memory was Kahiki.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a Columbus restaurant?
Yeah, so I'm the co-author of the Kahiki Supper Club, and we'd written a book about it, and Liz Lesner had opened up another restaurant called the Grass Skirt, so it was kind of tied to that. Now they've got Pete the Pig, the Fountain out there. We actually have some Kahiki menus back in the back, and I'm so in love with tiki stuff. Christine knows we opened up a tiki bar in my basement in Berwick. So, and she was there for the grand opening that we had. It was really great
The
fun.
interesting thing about that is if you go inside their factory or their plant now, I have a friend that sells them their gas.
Still have the frozen foods.
That and they have the Polynesian statue, I guess, still in there. Their original.
Sure. So I'll give you a real brief history of the Kahiki. So it gets started by Lee Henry and Bill Sapp, who started the Top. And the Top was very successful, still a very successful restaurant out on the east side, just past Bexley. And they wanted a more casual place. So it was the 60s, Hawaii was just becoming a state, a lot of folks returning from the South Pacific. So they went to the Mai Kai in Fort Lauderdale, and if you've ever been to the Mai Kai in Fort Lauderdale, the Kahiki, as we know it, was kind of a carbon copy. So they opened up the Kahiki in 61, and it stayed very, very busy all the way up till its closing day in 2000. They got into the frozen food business through Dave Thomas. Dave Thomas was a concessionaire at East High School when we had Son of Heaven come in. Any of you guys remember Son of Heaven at Old Central High School before it became COSI? Dave Thomas went to the South family, who Bill and Lee Henry had sold the Kahiki to in the 70s, said, can you do something that's more of like an Asian theme? And so they came up, sure, we can do egg rolls. So they started making egg rolls in the basement of the Kahiki and then shipping them over to Son of Heaven. That's when they discovered they could do frozen foods. And the frozen foods were far more profitable and far more lucrative for them to do that. So the business, even when they closed it in 2000, was still making $1.5 million in sales annually. And I think it just missed the whole foodie kind of revolution by about 3 or 4 years. But the Kahiki was amazing. It was right at the corner of Napoleon and Broad Street. There's a Revco or a CVS or something there now across from the Lowe's, right there. But it had 3 bars. It was 5 foot tall. It had giant Easter Island heads that are called moai, flanked with flames. It's one of the first places you could get valet parking. My grandfather tried to be the big shot in 1962 when my parents got engaged, and so he took the whole family out there to use his Diners Club card. It was a big deal. So we missed the Kahiki like crazy. So thank you for that. Thank you for letting me talk about the Kahiki, because that was the big criticism when Christine and I wrote this book was, how come there's not a chapter on the Kahiki? And we said, there's a whole book, right? So in the next book, we actually do kind of an afterwards where we talk about the Kahiki.
I was there the night it opened. I was a teenager, and the owner took us back inside the moai, and it was a two-way mirror that you could look out into the dining room. And if you look in the tiki book back there, it has a little bit on the Kahiki, and you can see where that little window is that you peeked out at people while they were eating dinner.
And the memories of the Kahiki still live. In 2015, there was actually a big exhibition in Paris, France on tiki culture called Tiki Pop, and they had a museum exhibition, and in the catalogue raisonné of the exhibition, there's a whole chapter just on the Kahiki. So.
And the hula hop at the Grass Skirt last week, the Kahiki frozen food people were selling the yum yum sticks there, so
we're told
they're still in business.
We can take one more. Who's got the last question? Nobody? Not even that table over there? All right, here we go.
When did the engine house?
Oh, Engine House. We have that in here. That was really sad. The owners were in a really tragic boating accident because they had they had several restaurants. There was a restaurant in Cleveland, and they were in a. You might know this, Mayor LaShaka, more than because you were down in there, but like. Yeah, I know it's in the book, but it would be in the mid to late We're going to look it up here. It's all in the book. But yeah, it was really tragic. There was a terrible boating accident. They were lost at sea.
Bermuda Triangle.
In the Bermuda Triangle, of all places.
Okay, 73 to 90.
Oh, 93, 73 to 93. So, thank you all very much. We're back there. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Christine, for a delicious presentation. I invite you all back again next Monday for our next meeting. Our speaker then will be Ted Celeste, and he'll be speaking on the National Institute for Civil Discourse. Thank you, and our meeting is adjourned.